Great. So, hi and welcome to this 2 p.m. session of the Socratic Seminar and the Odyssey on 11/30/2017. And Mrs. Campbell is here,
Hello.
and I'm here, and Jasmine's here. So, anyhow, the Odyssey. Let's just go ahead and get started right away. Some background info is, Mrs. Campbell, would you like to say a word or two about the Odyssey before we begin?
You do such a good job of it.
Okay.
You start. Are you there? I'm suddenly out. I have no audio.
Hello, hello.
Okay,
Hello?
I'm back now. All right, I restarted it. Okay,
can you
go
hear
ahead.
me?
Yes, I can hear
Okay,
you.
can you hear me?
I
Okay,
can-
great.
Yeah.
So are we rolling?
We're rolling. Go.
Hello? Okay. All right. So welcome to the Socratic Seminar 9P, the Odyssey Socratic Seminar. And we'll just get started right away. This is about the Odyssey. Prior to Homer writing the Iliad, this is some background info. Prior to Homer writing the Iliad and the Odyssey, which are the two epics that he's responsible for, the stories that would eventually comprise these two epic poems were recited by storytellers. And in this way, the stories were passed down from generation to generation. And this kind of epic was called an oral epic. And it was called an oral epic because storytellers passed down these stories from one generation to the next orally. Can you hear me?
Yeah,
Okay,
I can hear
great. Okay, great. Now, since Homer took many of these stories and wrote them down, he created a new kind of epic, and that epic is called the art epic because he created works of art in writing the Iliad and the Odyssey. Okay, so there are basically two epic traditions, the oral epic tradition and the art epic tradition. All right, so here's some background about Homer himself. It's been widely believed that Homer was blind. Moreover, it has been said that he was from Ionia, and it's believed that the poems were composed in the 8th or 7th century BC. The Homeric epics have had a great influence on artists throughout the centuries. Who have created visual art, music, and literature based on the Iliad and the Odyssey. And I mentioned last session that when I was into listening to rock music, I found an album called The Odyssey, and I loved it. It was basically a rock version of the Odyssey from beginning to end. So that's an example of how the Odyssey has influenced Western culture. Homer's works also had a great influence on Greek culture and education. Did you want to say anything here, Mrs. Campbell?
Well, the fact that it was quite a while before anything was actually written down, and I don't know, Jasmine, if you've seen books where in the library it shows this is the Iliad and this is the Odyssey. We're talking huge books. The Odyssey is, probably about 200 pages as it is, but then you've got the Iliad is twice that, and think of it as these poems were memorized. That's why they were done in poems so that they would be easier to remember, and people would pass it down to they'd all know what the poem is and they'd recite it, and that's how they learned it. They never really actually wrote it down until years later.
Great. Okay, so thank you. What is an epic? An epic is a long story, and it's oftentimes a narrative poem. And there are basically two types of poetry. One kind of poetry is called lyric poetry, and it's usually pretty short, and it's very emotional. And narrative poetry is usually longer, and it tells a story. That's why it's called narrative poetry. And so the Iliad and the Odyssey and some other epics are examples of narrative poetry. And so an epic is a long story, oftentimes a narrative poem, in which a hero journeys across a vast expanse of geography so as to achieve a goal. And the hero must journey from the known world into the unknown world so as to begin his or her quest. And this is from Joseph Campbell. He actually has a nice diagram about this. So for an elderly person, though, an epic journey might be walking to the market with his or her walker, navigating the cracks in the sidewalk. So really the context of the journey is dependent upon the situation. And sometimes the hero falls into the quest, not meaning to. And sometimes the hero purposefully decides to go on his quest or her quest because maybe life has become stale or boring. There's a desire for newness in life. And so a person just decides to literally leave their old life behind and find a new one. Moreover, the hero faces challenges and temptations, often is given a special guide or mentor to help him or her, and is often given a special weapon and journeys into the land of the dead for private knowledge and returns home to set things right, to demonstrate that a kind of transformation has taken place in the hero and in his or her home and perhaps even in the community as well. So, Mrs. Campbell, last session you spoke about archetypes, and would you
Right.
like to just basically cover what these
Sure.
archetypes represent? Or
Yeah, the archetypes are it's kind of an unwritten rule of what they need to be. Like, for example, a mentor. The mentor is a particular character that you find in all of these different tales. For example, Yoda or Obi-Wan Kenobi in the Star Wars epics. They are the mentors that help the character along. Haymitch in the Hunger Games is a mentor. These are all people who are older, wiser, and can help the hero in dealing with their challenges. There are other roles as well. Campbell has oh gosh, let me bring it up here. There's a shapeshifter in that these people, like for example, the enemy can be a shape changer or shape shifter, where they might even be acting as a mentor. So you go back, and this was in the video, the Glove and Boots video that shows you what the different roles were in that. But they are a typical role that somebody plays. So the archetypes are these specific roles in the tales that are meant to help you and all humans become better people.
great. And Carl Jung, who is responsible for a lot of the research on archetypes, says that archetypes are what he calls primordial images that are in all of our subconsciouses. We identify with, like, for example, a circle. A circle is an archetypal shape, and so is a triangle, and so is a square. A line. A line is an archetypal shape that really demonstrates an appeal to the rational side of man, and a circle is an archetypal shape that appeals to the spiritual side of man or woman, of course. So these are primordial images, and anyhow, the hero has gained valuable experience on his or her quest, and sometimes comes home with physical treasure, as well as the wisdom from his or her experience. Mrs. Campbell, would you like to talk a little bit about what you said last time? You said the quest is really about getting to know the self.
Well, it's to improve the self. And so the whole purpose of the journey is that you are called to action, and you're taken out of your life as you know it, and through going through the quest and through the challenges that you meet, you become stronger. And that then when you return, so there is a homecoming at the end of this journey, you are a better person for having gone through all of those things. So it's coming back to the original place, but that original place is better because of what you have gone through, or the hero.
Great. Nicely said. So I can't wait to get to the part where you read. Are you going to read again?
Oh, sure. When did
Okay.
you just tell me when.
Okay. All right. So the Invocation of the Muse. This is another a kind of epic convention, or this is an epic convention, maybe the first one we're talking about now. And so if do you have a book, Jasmine? Well, let me give you mine. Okay. And that means, Mrs. Campbell, that you're going to have to read all the passages. Is that okay?
That's fine.
Okay, thank you. Okay, I'm back. All right, thank you so much, Mrs. Campbell, for being willing to read. It's really a benefit to all of us. Okay, so here we go. The Invocation of the Muse. In page 651 of your book, you'll see these lines, these two lines. Sing in me, Muse, and through me tell the story of that man skilled in all ways of contending. And of course, it's talking about Odysseus, who is skilled in all ways of contending. And now look down to line 16, and it says, of these adventures, Muse, daughter of Zeus, tell us in our time, lift the great song again. And so as we can see that this is something that happens at the beginning of the Odyssey. It happens at the beginning of lots of different epics. And basically what it is like a kind of prayer to the muse of epic poetry. And the muse of epic poetry is named Calliope. And so the purpose of this prayer to this deity, Calliope, is to help the storyteller tell the story in a way that is elegant and interesting. And so what this tells us is that the Greeks had this idea that there was something beyond the physical world, that there was this spiritual essence, this muse of poetry or epic poetry. And she's one of the 9 daughters of Zeus and Mnemosyne. And Mnemosyne is the goddess of memory. And you might remember that Zeus is actually married to Hera, but Mnemosyne is the mother of Calliope. So the 9 muses were goddesses who inspired storytellers, writers, visual artists, and scientists. So the Invocation of the Muse is an epic convention. We see this in lots of epics. And so the question really is, why is the Invocation of the Muse in epics, at the beginning of epics? Why does the storyteller who's singing or telling the epic call upon the muse to help him or her? What's the point of that? What do you think, Jasmine? Any ideas? No? Okay, that's all right. All right. So, Mrs. Campbell,
let me ask Jasmine this, because I know we'll get this out of the way now. Jasmine, were you able to do all of the reading for the Odyssey? And it's okay to say no.
Yeah, I did.
You did do it. Good for you. And on a like a percentage, give me a percentage of what you think you understood in your reading. 100%.
I think I understood most of it, like 90.
Okay. Good. Okay. All right. That helps me then, and helps Mr. Short too when we're asking the questions. So, but in regards to that question, the other thing I think of, now you guys haven't got to it yet, but in the second semester and it's actually module 2. We're going to start with Romeo and Juliet. And even Shakespeare himself starts with a chorus, although the chorus has a little bit different purpose there. That's kind of a spoiler alert. It tells the story before it happens. But the muse is I think, to add credibility. Also, the idea, if you look at the name of that goddess, that's where we get the term mnemonic from. A mnemonic is a memory device. And so going back to where we had all these really long things to memorize and to tell, to call upon the muse to help the orator speak the poem, it was to help make sure all the details were right and that the story was being told exactly the way it's supposed to be told. So it's kind of bringing the spiritual down to a human level so that the listener would know that this is not just the orator speaking, but that the gods are speaking as well.
That's exactly right. And I'd like to add one more thing to that, if I may. And what I'd like to say is basically that this invocation of the muse has a purpose of making the tone of the poem very formal and making it very elevated in the sense that it becomes high poetry, not just lay poetry. Does that make sense?
Mm-hmm. Go ahead and
Okay.
mute your mic, please. Jasmine. Yeah. We're getting the feedback again. Either that or we could just, maybe we should just mute you.
That's fine.
It's fine,
Okay.
Jasmine. Don't worry about it.
Okay. Essay prompt. In order to understand Odysseus's... Now, normally I give the essay prompts at the end of the Socratic seminars, but this time I'm going to give it here at the beginning. And the essay prompt that you're going to be writing the essay on is, in order to understand Odysseus's characteristics, it is important to understand that he is an epic hero. As such, he displays characteristics that are both heroic as well as human. Write an essay in which you describe both Odysseus's heroic traits as well as his human traits, and be sure to use evidence from the epic poem to support your analysis, or quotations. Evidence means quotations. So, how is he both an epic hero and a human? And so that's the task. Do you have any questions about that, Jasmine? Oh, I think you got it. Okay, good. All right. So here we go. Homeric epithets. Here is another epic convention. And a Homeric epithet is a word or words of adjectival import. That just means fancy way of saying adjectives that qualifies or qualify or characterizes or characterize a person or thing, usually an important person or thing, in such a way that an important quality of the person or thing is highlighted. And so if you would turn to page, I don't think you have to do that because we have the words here on the screen. On page 652, line 47, we are shown this term divine calypso. And the word divine is the Homeric epithet that describes calypso. And so Homer does this throughout the Odyssey for various characters, describing them in certain ways to highlight with adjectives, these epithets, their highest qualities. And so if you look at page 654, but I don't think you really have to because the words are here. If you look at line 101, notice versatile Odysseus. And so what would be the Homeric epithet here? It would be the word versatile because it's the adjective that describes the proper noun Odysseus. So how does Odysseus display his versatility throughout the Odyssey? And that's a question that we'll be getting to. Would you like to answer that question, Jasmine? What do you think?
Because he's like able to do like many things.
Yeah. Yeah. Can you give an example?
I don't know. He just displays like it says like heroic qualities and then human qualities too. I don't know, like he's a fighter, like he fought in the Trojan War, but then he also wants to get back home to his family. He doesn't want to just stay out and continue to whatever fight and do heroic things.
That's great. Yeah, he wants to stay home. At the beginning of the Iliad, he doesn't want to go to war. He wants to stay home, and you're right. But when he does have to go to war, he goes to war fully. Great. Did you want to say anything, Mrs. Campbell, about that?
Well, and the thing about epithet is also what they would term when they put it on a tombstone. And it's kind of like the last thing to say about a person or to qualify that person. And so these epithets, the Homeric ones, it's whatever the adjective is, it's actually describing a heroic trait. It's something that all man should strive to be. And so versatile, that one has to do with being flexible and being able to adapt to certain situations. So it's kind of like a compliment. And so to me, it's Homer's way of kind of telling us what we need to strive to be.
That's right. And, the dark side of the word epithet is that these days, the word epithet oftentimes is used to indicate a negative term applied to someone's name so as to marginalize them or dehumanize them in some way. And so anyhow, moving on. So considering the writing prompt, it may be a good thing for you to look for other Homeric epithets that Homer uses to describe Odysseus and use those to highlight his heroic traits. Does that make sense, Jasmine? Okay, great. Moving on. Okay, Homeric Similes. If you turn to page 665, and I think you're going to have to do that this time, Jasmine, and look at line 368, what you'll see on that page is that Odysseus describes the way he blinded the Cyclops. He compares his heroic action of blinding the Cyclops to the everyday action of men drilling a hole in the planking of a ship. And so this comparison works for at least a couple of different reasons. Mrs. Campbell, do you have your book with you by chance?
Yes, I do.
Oh, would you be able to read that?
Okay.
Thank you.
We're going from 368 to...
Yeah.
All right.
Just to the end of the assembly.
Okay. Now, by the gods, I drove my big handspike deep in the embers, charring it again, and cheered my men along with battle talk to keep their courage up. No quitting now. The pike of olive, green though it had been, reddened and glowed as if about to catch. I drew it from the coals, and my four fellows gave me a hand, lugging it near the Cyclops. As more than natural force nerved them, straight forward they sprinted, lifted it, and rammed it deep in his crater eye, and I leaned on it, turning it as a shipwright turns a drill in planking, having men below to swing the two-handled strap that spins it in the groove. So with our brand, we bored that great eye socket while blood ran out around the red-hot bar. Eyelid and lash were seared, the pierced ball hissed broiling, and the roots popped. Isn't that lovely?
Yeah, that's wonderful. Okay, so
I love that one.
So do I. It's great. All right, so so you can see that there are these two different actions that are being compared in this simile. One action is the heroic action of boring the eye out of the eye socket of the Cyclops by Odysseus. If that's not passive voice, I don't know what is. But and then what we have is that's being compared to the everyday action of men drilling a hole in the planking of a ship. So that's. Can you guys hear me?
I can.
Okay. Okay, great. So
Jasmine's
so that
muted, so.
Okay, great. So that's what a Homeric simile is. What it does is it uses the context of an everyday action to apply that context to the heroic action. Let me ask you this question: has anyone ever really seen a hero drive a spear into the eye of a Cyclops? Okay, and you'd be like, no, I don't think anyone's ever seen that, right? And so, basically, then what Homer is doing is he is creating the context so you understand that. And the simile is like, if you understand how it looks for men to bore a hole in the deck of a ship, then you would know how it is for men to um, uh, to to uh, to drill the eye out of the Cyclops. And this works for a couple different reasons. One reason it works is because the Cyclops is so big, he's like a ship. And then, so there we go. Now, again, looking at the bottom, again, a Homeric simile might work well in your essay so as to show Odysseus's heroic qualities. So you might want to use a Homeric simile in your essay, Jasmine, to show Odysseus's heroic qualities. Does that make sense? Okay, great. Okay, so moving on. Okay, the journey to the underworld for private knowledge. Okay, lots of heroes journey to the underworld. Orpheus journeys to the underworld to get his wife back. Doesn't really work out though. And so Dante journeys to the underworld in Dante's Inferno, and Odysseus journeys to the underworld in the Odyssey. And so, Campbell, would you like to say a word or two about the underworld and its mythic significance, like you did last time?
Well, the underworld doesn't have to necessarily be Hades or hell or wherever death. It is kind of a death in a sense, but the underworld can also be figurative. Like if you look at well, I kind of date myself when I do the Star Wars thing, but they get into the trash compactor there. You know, there's down in the dirt and the muck, and this is the worst and lowest place that you can be. The cave in the Hunger Games. There's a place at which you have to go that is the darkest and the most confined place in order to get what you need in order to carry on in the journey. And in this case, it's the information that Odysseus needs the way back to Ithaca. So Tiresias is kind of like his GPS system, I guess you could say.
Yeah, that's good. So the significance of going into the underworld is that it is where a person can gain private knowledge that nobody else on the face of the earth is privy to. And so, like Mrs. Campbell said, Odysseus journeys into the underworld, and he speaks to Tiresias. That's one of the people he speaks to there. He also speaks to his dead mother. But when he speaks to Tiresias, Tiresias tells him some important information that's meant to really help him. And anyhow, I think in the interest of time, we're just going to kind of blow past this one. But what I will say is that Tiresias basically warns Odysseus that he needs to have restraint on his journey home and not allow his crew or himself to eat of the cattle of Lord Helios. And if he does, or his crew do, then what's going to happen is that he won't be able to get home quickly. He is going to suffer for years on the ocean as a consequence for not showing restraint. And so basically, this is knowledge that Tiresias, the blind prophet, who also appears in Oedipus Rex, is giving to Odysseus so as to help him. The problem is that Odysseus is just a man and he makes mistakes. And so he doesn't take, it just turns out bad for him. And so, again, the journey to the underworld. And so Odysseus ends up harried for years on the ocean as a result of his crew. And so, again, the journey into the underworld is an example you would be able to use in your essay so as to show a heroic quality of Odysseus, how he's special and not just regular, average, everyday guy. Does that make sense? Journey to the underworld? Okay, great. All right, divine intervention. Divine intervention in the Odyssey is when a god or goddess interferes in a mortal's life or mortals' lives. And so if you turn to page 705 and look at 1285 and begin reading the commentary in italics after that line, and then after that, look at the statement that begins with "at this moment." So, would one of you two like to read that, Mrs. Campbell, maybe, or Jasmine? It's up to you.
Jasmine, did you want to read at all?
I'm good.
Okay.
Thank you.
All right. Okay. So Telemachus joins his father in the fight. They are helped by the swineherd and the cowherd. Now the suitors trapped in the hall without weapons are struck right and left by arrows, and many of them lie dying on the floor. Another great. I wonder why you make me read this stuff. At this moment, that unmanning thundercloud, the Aegeus, Athena's shield, took form aloft in the great hall, and the suitors, mad with fear at her great sign, stampeded like stung cattle by a river, when the dread shimmering gadfly strikes in summer, in the flowering season, in the long-drawn days. After them the attackers wheeled as terrible as falcons from eyries in the mountains, veering over and diving down with talons wide unsheathed on flights of birds who cower down the sky in shoots and bursts along the valley. But the pouncing falcons grip their prey, no frantic wing avails, and farmers love to watch those beaked hunters, so these now fell upon the suitors in that hall, turning to strike, and strike again, while torn men moaned at death, and blood ran smoking over the whole floor.
Wow, what an image.
Happy holidays.
Okay. Yeah,
Sounds
really.
like Black Friday, actually.
Yeah, no kidding. So, divine intervention in the Odyssey is when a god or goddess interferes in a mortal's life or mortals' lives. And so, which god or goddess intervenes to help Odysseus and Telemachus at this moment? Did you catch that, Jasmine? Athena, that's right. And so, how specifically does the intervention help Odysseus and Telemachus? Well, the intervention is this shield of Athena's called the Aegis, and what it is a cloud that appears and lightning strikes out of it. Actually, there is a missile system that the U.S. has called the Aegis missile system, and kind of interesting based on Greek mythology. And so, can you explain the Homeric simile that follows? Okay, so there's this Homeric simile that follows, Jasmine, and can you explain it?
Homer's saying that it was like an eagle attacking prey, or a hawk or something.
Yeah, like a falcon.
A falcon.
Many falcons.
Yeah, that's right. Okay, good. So the way in which Odysseus and Telemachus attacked the suitors was like watching falcons attack other birds in the sky. These birds of prey, these falcon attacking these suitors. And so getting justice. And so, again, referencing, and before we go on, I think I forgot to say this, that divine intervention in this case is Athena using the Aegis to frighten the suitors, to instill their consciousness with fear, and then thereby helping Odysseus and Telemachus to kill them. So again, referencing divine intervention in your essay could help you show that Odysseus is more than just average, more than just an everyday man. And so how would divine intervention show that Odysseus is more than an average everyday man, Jasmine?
It shows that he has like help from the gods and stuff, that they're favoring him.
That's right. Very good. Okay. Homecoming. And did you want to say anything about that previous slide, Mrs. Campbell? I'm sorry.
No, you both have covered it. You're good.
Okay, homecoming. Literary critics sometimes use the term to indicate the homecoming of a hero at the end of a quest in a narrative romance like the Odyssey. The term narrative romance means that this is one of basically four types of stories that are told, four general types of stories that are told. There are like maybe subdivisions of some of them, but a narrative romance is like a quest story. When we say romance, we don't mean like a romance novel that you'd find at the grocery store or like a Hollywood romance. What this means is a quest, and it's an archetype. It's called a narrative archetype. There are basically four narrative archetypes. There's romance and tragedy and comedy and irony. And if you look at page 709, line 1408, Odysseus and Penelope are reunited, and Odysseus can express himself emotionally to her, and she expresses herself emotionally to him. And this image is illustrated and elevated by a kind of formal language by the use of a Homeric simile. And I know that Mrs. Campbell wants to read this because this is like her favorite
Yes.
part in the
And
Odyssey,
after
right?
reading those first two, it's kind of nice to get to something very pleasant to read. I really love the. This is
Okay, good.
much better.
Okay, good.
Now from his breast into his eyes the ache of longing mounted, and he wept at last. His dear wife, clear and faithful, in his arms longed for, as the sun-warm earth is longed for by a swimmer spent in rough water, where his ship went down under Poseidon's blows, gale winds and tons of sea. Few men can keep alive through a big surf, to crawl, clotted with brine, on kindly beaches, in joy, knowing the abyss behind. And so she too rejoiced, her gaze upon her husband, her white arms round him pressed, as though forever.
Great. And so, nicely read. And there is this Homeric simile, and I'm pretty sure that you caught the Homeric simile, Jasmine, and so perhaps you could use this image and Homeric simile to show how Odysseus demonstrates both the qualities of the epic hero and a regular mortal man. Does that make sense? Okay, good. All right, moving on. We're going a little faster this time. That's okay.
Yeah, we ran into a lot of. We really like this, so that we have a lot of information to give. So forgive us if it seems like it's. And Jasmine, when you have a question, please stop us and ask your question.
That's right.
Sure.
So, yep. So, any questions, Jasmine? No? Okay. All right. So, the Threshold Guardian. In an epic, the hero must pass from the known world into the unknown world. In order to do this, the hero must pass a Threshold Guardian who guards a threshold between the known and the unknown worlds. And this is from Joseph Campbell. Now, he says that, and Folk and Smith also talk about this, I think. There are three ways to pass beyond the Threshold Guardian. You can bribe the Guardian with something that he or she wants in order to pass by the Guardian. So an example of that would be, and I know, Jasmine, earlier you mentioned the Iliad. An example of this is found in the Iliad, where Agamemnon, who's this great warrior king in Greece, sacrifices his own daughter by slitting her throat. And her name is Iphigenia. Sorry to say that, but that's what he does. And so he sacrifices his own daughter, Iphigenia, to appease the goddess of Artemis, or the goddess Artemis, whom he had offended by killing a deer in one of her sacred groves. And he sacrifices his daughter so that Artemis will allow the winds to blow, so that he and the other Achaeans, or the Greeks, can sail from Greece to Troy to get Helen back and to punish the Trojans for having taken her. So in this case, Agamemnon bribes the goddess Artemis with the sacrifice of his own daughter, so that the wind will blow and the Greeks can use that wind to sail to Troy to get Helen back. Because Helen was a national treasure. But apparently, Iphigenia wasn't nearly as important, right? So, because of this, because his own murder of his daughter and his infidelity and the fact, his infidelity, he comes home and is killed. And so now, Threshold Guardians continue. The second way to get beyond a Threshold Guardian is to fool him or her. And this is an example. This is found in the Odyssey when the Cyclops guards the threshold to his cave, having trapped Odysseus' men inside. Odysseus displays his cunning when he fools the Cyclops into becoming inebriated or drunk so that the men could blind him and allow for their escape. As a side note, it's ironic then that Odysseus yells to the Cyclops Odysseus' name after he and his men are free, risking his own life and the lives of his crew. And so this is an example of how Odysseus demonstrates the heroic ideal in freeing his men, but falls short to human fallibility in the end. And so the Cyclops, you'll notice, really only has one eye, right? And the reason that one of the reasons that the Cyclops might only have one eye is that it represents the kind of unbalanced psyche or unbalanced consciousness, in that it represents, like, I've heard it said before that it represents aggression, blind aggression. But in thinking more about it, I think the Cyclops really represents what a psychopath is. Someone basically who has no conscience, who's willing to cause great harm to others, including death. You notice that the Cyclops eats Odysseus' men alive, and he tears them from piece to piece. And but the doctors these days don't use the word psychopath anymore. They use this other term called antisocial personality disorder. You can look it up on the web if you're interested in learning more about that. But anyhow, a psychopath doesn't have a balanced consciousness. He or she has no empathy or feelings for the people he or she hurts. There's absolutely no remorse, absolutely no sense of conscience for what he or she does. And this is inherent in the Cyclops. The Cyclops doesn't see the men in Odysseus' crew as being important. He sees them as being basically food, and they have no inherent dignity as men, and that's how they're treated by the Cyclops, who is a representation of power. And so kind of interesting. And so the point I'm trying to make is that there is this hierarchical structuring. A hierarchy is basically a way to order things from the top to the bottom in terms of a what you might call a system, or some kind of an organization, where like the biggest thing or the most important role is at the top, and the least important role is at the bottom. So if you can imagine, like the Catholic Church, for example, at the top is the Pope, and then below the Pope are various cardinals, and then below them are the bishops, and below them are the priests, and below them are the laity. And so basically this that's an example of a hierarchy that is objective in the sense that it describes roles rather than values of people. But there are hierarchies that I think fallaciously describe the value of people. And so the Greek hierarchy, the ancient Greece, is one of those. And what it does is it sets the gods above people, and basically devalues the person. And that's not in every case, of course. Like for example, Odysseus is loved by Athena. She finds value in him, but if you look at Zeus, who is this the king god, then the way he treats women, mortal women, and then the way that Hera treats those same women, turning them into elements of nature, we see that there's a devaluing of the humanity of people by the gods. And some people call this the capricious nature of the gods, but I see it more as kind of like a hierarchy. And so anyhow, my question to you is, do we still have in our society like subjective hierarchies that pretend to be objective, that really describe the relative value of people rather than objective roles that those people demonstrate in organizations? So my question to you really is, um, uh, do those kind of hierarchies exist these days, or have they existed recently, like in our culture in America? What do you think?
People are treated different because of class, or yeah.
Yeah. Okay. So there's class and there's sex, right? And what else is there? There is race and gender and culture, and all these things have been used used as descriptors of value in subjective hierarchies that basically are fallacious. They don't hold any weight because they're subjective. They're not objective. They don't describe roles. They describe the relative value of people. And so, like for example, if you're of lower rank in a system or organization than somebody else, you might be seen as being contemptible and worthy of all sorts of horrible treatment because you're devalued subjectively in a system like that. So anyhow, that's just what I wanted to say about that. All right. So, did you have any comments to make about that, Mrs. Campbell?
No, I think you covered that one. I just that the threshold guardians, they also are the shapeshifters, so they can take different forms. So that's when you get when you think somebody's your friend, and then it turns out it's the enemy that you have to conquer. That would be known as a shapeshifter, but also the threshold guardian.
Great. And the Threshold Guardian continued. The third way to get beyond a Threshold Guardian is to engage in mortal combat with the Guardian. It is not the wisest course of action, as Threshold Guardians are often bigger and stronger than epic heroes. However, it may be successfully done, as Odysseus shows us at the end of the Odyssey, as he and his son engage in mortal combat with the suitors who have become the Threshold Guardians of his home. And so you may recall that Athena gives him a gift prior to him going to his own home, and that gift is the disguise of a beggar. You remember that? Okay, great. Now, this kind of gift is often referred to as the gift of the goddess. That's the term I think that Joseph Campbell gives to it. And now, though Athena assists Odysseus in this manner, basically this is referred to as divine intervention. It is Odysseus who still is heroic and wise enough to accept her help. Okay, so let's. Did you have anything to say about that, Mrs. Campbell?
No, we've got 8 minutes.
Okay, all right. We're gonna get through this really quickly. We've already covered the Cyclops. One thing I didn't say last time was that there are these characters that I don't think are actually in our version of the text. That's excerpted in our textbook, but they're called the Phaeacians, and Odysseus is only a man, and this is clearly revealed in the Odyssey when the Phaeacians sail him home on one of their swift black ships. That's how he gets home. That's how Odysseus gets home to Ithaca, is the Phaeacians take him home. And so other people help him. And they give him a sleeping potion so as to allow him to rest as they journey with him to Ithaca. If he were a god, he would need no rest, but because he's only a man, he must rest. And so Homer doesn't want us to forget that Odysseus, though extraordinary, is only a man with human limitations. And this fact is what makes him so heroic. The fact that he is only human and does so many things so well in spite of the overwhelming odds against him. Does he make mistakes? Absolutely. One example is how he baits the blind Cyclops, but he perseveres, and he is given help by people like the Phaeacians and Athena, the goddess, and other deities to finish his quest. So he's both human and heroic. And what do you think about that? Does that make sense, Mrs. Campbell?
Yeah, and the thing is, if Odysseus was not human, why would we be interested in him? So
That's
these
right.
human traits, his hubris, his pride, gets the better of him. He really he is a good leader, but he's very Machiavellian. He knows that his men are going to die; they're not going to last, but he never tells them. So he makes human mistakes, but by the end, when he gets to the end, he realizes the mistakes that he's made, and he is repentant over them. And so that's why he has to have those human qualities as well as these great qualities, because he still makes mistakes. And so the real message is that when we examine these mistakes, we proactively can avoid them, because we know what Odysseus went through.
That's right. And then there's the return home to set things right. And now Odysseus returns home. He's reunited with his son Telemachus. And remember that he hadn't seen his son in over 20 years. Or maybe not over 20 years, close to 20 years. The last time he beheld his son was just an infant. Mm-hmm. So we can see that Odysseus and his son have lost a lot in not seeing each other for 2 decades. So Odysseus and Telemachus are reunited, and Athena gives Odysseus the disguise of a beggar to enter into his palace without being killed by the verminous suitors, and he and his sons kill the suitors and dispatch the maids who were sympathetic to them, and then Odysseus is reunited with his wife Penelope. So that's what happens, right? Mm-hmm. And so here are some questions to consider, and I'm just going to kind of blow through these kind of quickly, and then when you watch the video that's going to be posted, you can copy them down. You can pause it at this moment and copy them down and answer them, and then submit them to me via email, because I have the email link on the page. Okay? All right. So here's what they are. In which ways is Odysseus heroic? All right. In which ways is Odysseus like a normal man? What are his negative traits? From what you've observed of Odysseus, how would you describe what the Greeks valued in a hero? Okay, does Odysseus display obedience to divine powers? When? Is obedience to divine powers valued today? Does Odysseus display a love of home and family? How? Is a love of home and family valued today in the same way? How does Penelope test Odysseus after the battle? Why is it ironic that Odysseus returns to his kingdom dressed as a beggar? And do you think Odysseus' revenge on the suitors and maids is excessive or too brutal? And so is Odysseus noble or not? What are some reasons either way? There we go. So basically those are the questions. Just go ahead and answer them. Like I said, submit them to me via email, and that'll be great.
You can also put them on the discussion board. So the classes are going to have different discussion boards, but that's also a place where you want to post these answers.
Okay, great. Mrs. Campbell, would you like to say anything in parting?
Well, I just want to know if Jasmine has any questions about any of the sections, anything about the Odyssey or what she needs to do. Do you have any questions?
No, I don't think so.
Okay.
I think I got it.
All right. The only thing I think I would add then is that, because I know a lot of students are going to say, how do I start the essay? If you look back at the prompt, in fact, can you go back to the prompt, please, Mr. Short?
Oh, sure. Okay, whoops, didn't mean to do that. Okay, all right, there we go.
Okay, and so here, the setup here, write an essay in which you describe both his heroic traits as well as his human traits, and be sure to use the evidence. You actually have, if you look at this, it's basically a 4-paragraph essay. So you have the introduction, and in that introduction, you're going to talk about Odysseus. Why is he an epic hero? So it's a blanket statement of why he's an epic hero. Then the first body paragraph would be examples of his heroic traits. And that's when you can start looking at those epithets and the heroic similes and whatnot to get the heroic out of him. But then in the second body paragraph, what does he do that shows his humanity? Basically, what mistakes does he make? And why does he make them? So he's very proud. And so, he, even though he probably had a right to kind of do what he did to the Cyclops, his pride still got him into trouble, at least with Poseidon. So that's a body paragraph, and then the heroic elements is a body paragraph. And then make sure that you're bringing in, when you bring in the evidence from the text, you'll want to do just like Mr. Short did, and that is refer to the line numbers. And so you go to whatever section it is and the page number, and then put the line numbers in where that text is, and put those in parentheses at the end of where you quote those. So I think that's all I needed to say about format.
Okay, great. Well, thank you, Mrs. Campbell, for for being an important part of this discussion, and thank you, Jasmine, for coming.
Okay, thank you.
Thank
Bye.
you. All right, bye-bye.